Hi guys, it's Matt here from MCS-books, and today I'm going to be doing a sort of wrap-up review video, I guess. You may know if you saw my video at the start of May that I was following Diana in Colour's top tips for reading more. So she had 12 tips and I took them and see which ones I wanted to adapt into my life to see if I could get myself reading more. And this video is going to be me basically discussing how my reading went, what I read and how much I read, whether Diana's tips worked for me and which ones I hope to then put into the future so that I could keep this reading pace up, if that all makes sense. So at the start of May, I listened to Diana's tips and I chose to take on pretty much all of them except for the last one, which was to read audiobooks, because I'm not an audiobook fan, as you may know. So I took them on and I made a sort of reading journal. And within that reading journal, I gave myself 4 goals. First goal was to read 50 pages a day. The second goal was to finish a Brent Week's book. The third goal was to read 3 library books. And the fourth goal was to read for 20 minutes every morning. So ultimately, I didn't keep to all those goals. I actually only kept to 1 goal out of 4. And that was to read the Brent Week's book, which I did. The other goals were things that I did most days, yet as you'll see later in the video, there were some exceptions, so I couldn't tick them off overall. And the goal within the library book, that was more a bit out of my hand, because the book that I had reserved from the library didn't come in until the end of May, so I didn't get to read it in time. I did start it in May though, so that is something. However, let's look at the books. You can see I've got a pile of some of them here, but I've made some stats and figures of all the books that I've read in May. So let's start by looking at this month overall. So I read 8 books in total. I read The Accusation by Bandi, The Comfort of Things by Daniel Miller, The Boy Who Stole Attila's Horse by Iván Repila, Men Without Women by Haruki Murakami, The Black Prism by Brent Weeks, Slightly Foxed, which is a literary journal, At the Existentialist Cafe by Sarah Bakewell, and A Natural History of Dragons by Brennan. Now over the month of May, I kept track of how many days it took me to read each book. And you can see here in this chart that actually I did fairly well at distributing the books. Of course, some books took longer to read, some books took shorter. That did also depend on the length of the book, but there were other reasons why some books took me longer. You can see that The Accusation, Men Without Women, and A Natural History of Dragons took about the same amount of time to read. The Boy Who Stole Attila's Horse and Slightly Foxed took much less. And then the 2 books that took me the longest were At the Existentialist Cafe and The Black Prism, which again makes sense because they were probably the densest books I had to read. So then breaking those books down into genres, I read 2 short story collections, which was The Accusation and Men Without Women. I read 2 fantasy books, which were The Black Prism and A Natural History of Dragons. I ended up reading 3 non-fiction books, which was The Comfort of Things, Slightly Foxed, and At the Existentialist Cafe, and I ended up only reading 1 literary fiction book, which was The Boy Who Stole Attila's Horse. Surprisingly, one of the shortest ones. This was quite new to me actually, considering I always say I'm not a big fan of short story collections. I seldom read them, and it just so happened I read 2 this month. The first one, The Accusation, was a buddy read, and then Men Without Women, I just happened to have found an ARC randomly floating around my house, so I picked it up because I wanted something a little bit quicker in between reads. Yes, and 3 non-fiction books. And they were very different non-fiction books too. I think usually when I tend to read non-fiction books, they all tend to be quite the same. Usually about anthropology or something similar. So The Comfort of Things was an ethnographic collection of findings about how people live their lives based around the items in their houses. Slightly Foxed was a literary journal, so it had a collection of essays about old or out-of-print books, and At the Existentialist Cafe was a really nice biography and explanation of the existentialist movement, bringing in some of the most famous philosophical players within that time. And surprisingly, I think the book most similar to my non-fiction tastes was actually A Natural History of Dragons, which happened to be a fantasy read. So it was really nice to see that I got a good mix of books in here. Usually I tend to read more literary fiction, so I'm quite surprised that I read less of it this month. Now, in regards to how I rated them, I actually had a very good spectrum of books in regards to my star ratings. I had 2 2-star books, which were The Comfort of Things and Men Without Women. I only had 1 3-star book, which was The Black Prism. I had 3 4-star books, which was The Slightly Foxed, At the Existentialist Cafe, and The Accusation. And I had 2 5-star books, which were The Boy Who Stole Attila's Horse and A Natural History of Dragons. So you can see that I actually had a really great reading month for good books. Of course, I would have liked more in the 4 and 5 stars, but having only 3 in the 2 to 3 stars, I think is pretty decent. And the ones that were 2 stars were ones that kind of really surprised me because I thought I was going to enjoy them a lot more. So then let's have a look at the page counts of each book. So while I read 8 books, for me that didn't seem like a whole lot, because sometimes I can average that most months. However, what I do kind of neglect is that actually a lot of these books were bigger than the books I might tend to read. So for example, this year especially, I've read a lot of little black classics, which kind of boost the book count up, but not so much the page count. So I broke down the books here, and actually I read a really good mix of page counts. The Accusation was 246 pages. The Comfort of Things was 301 pages. The Boy Who Stole Attila's Horse was 100 pages. Murakami's Men Without Women was 230 pages. The Black Prism was 734 pages. That was the biggest tome, and I was fully aware that would be a challenge. Slightly Foxed was 94 pages. At the Existentialist Cafe was 327 pages, and A Natural History of Dragons was 351. So then overall, in the month of May, I actually read 2,383 pages, which I think made me feel a little bit better about how much I did read. And seeing that, I had about 4 books which were over 300, I mean, one of them was 301, but seeing that they were over 300 books, that kind of made me feel a little bit more better about how much I've read, because I think that could be considered a big book-ish. The Brent Weeks one was definitely massive. And in total, the average page count a day in May was about 76 pages, which was, 26 pages more than I had set myself to read every day. Now, this wasn't actually the reality. I didn't read 76 pages every single day, but it has given me a bit more awareness of how much I can actually achieve in reading a day. So I think that's something I definitely want to take over in the next months, and I should perhaps boost my goal of reading 50 pages a day to 75 pages a day, to give me that little bit of motivation, knowing that I can. And I will just give you a quick overlook of my reading sort of journal page, whatever it was, to give you an idea of how I kept track throughout the month of my progress. And you might notice some things which I'll probably talk about later. But yeah, overall, I did manage to keep quite average. And as I had known, the week that Davide was here, I definitely did read less. And I thought that maybe I might have continued reading the same amount, but we had a short time together, and I didn't want to spend a lot of it reading and not talking and catching up. So quite naturally, I think, I didn't read as much, which I am absolutely fine with. That doesn't bother me at all. I still consider that time well spent. So now, let's break down Diana's tips and see how they helped me throughout this month to fulfill this sort of reading challenge, and to see how they really did help me read more. So the first 6 tips that Diana gave was set aside time every day to read, set goals, keep yourself accountable, make sure your goals are achievable, make it a date, and take your book everywhere. Now, I said that I wanted to definitely keep that time in the evening before bed where I read. That I did very well. Usually I do read before bed, but this month I didn't end up spending too long downstairs watching TV or spending too long on Netflix. When it got to about 8:30 or 9 p.m, I took myself up to bed and I read until I was tired. And that's actually probably when I got most of my reading done. And then I set goals for myself. I set 4 goals in total, read 50 pages a day. Most days I did beat that. The only days that I didn't were because I was busy doing something else, but the days that I did, having that goal of 50 pages actually really pushed me to read more. Keeping myself accountable, yes, that worked really well. Having this page definitely drove me to keep documenting what I was doing and to keep sticking to my goals. So every time I filled it in, I wanted to have done it so I could fill it in properly. And then making sure my goals are achievable, I think I also did. I set myself very realistic goals, and even though I didn't manage to keep them, a lot of that was outside of my control so much, so I felt on an average month, perhaps these sort of goals are the ones I could really stick to. Make it a date. I actually didn't do so well on this one. I only really penciled in one date for myself, and that was at the start of the month. However, that's just because the way that my life is at the moment. As I am unemployed and as I have been working on essays and presentations for uni, my sense of time and my sense of place has been a bit skewed, so I haven't been able to really pencil in times where I can be like, okay, this day I definitely am going to go here at this time. I've kind of just gone when I wanted, where I wanted, and how I wanted. So I think, whilst that didn't work for me so well this month, it's something that when I do have more of a habitual time plan of my days, I will kind of pencil it in and it will make a lot more sense for penciling it in. And number 6 was taking my book everywhere. And I did say that I already did this, however, I wanted to remind myself when I did have my book and I did have some time waiting that I could read. That did not work for me at all. I don't know why, but I have this big issue that if I'm ever waiting for something, I can't do anything else. I don't know why, it's really weird. If I know that I'm waiting for a package to arrive between a 4-hour window, I will just sit in the living room for 4 hours like, when's he gonna get here? So I don't know, this is a bad habit of mine, and I'm not sure it's going to be something that I can change very quickly, something I probably should change, but I don't know. Does anyone else have this? When you are waiting for something, you just can't do something else. God knows why. So I think, yes, most of these goals, or most of these tips, actually worked out very well for me. I definitely am going to stick to setting aside my evening time. Definitely going to keep setting these sort of goals, but more like I'm going to keep the same goals, I guess, for each month. Keeping myself accountable has already failed because we are now in June, and my page that I designed, I don't think I can be bothered to do it every month, to redesign it to make it fit the months. So I'm going to spend this month, because I did like doing it, yet I know that each month, at the end of the month, I'm not going to even think about sitting down and redoing it for the next month. So this month I'm going to kind of try to figure out a plan to kind of get them all done in once so that I can just flick through each time, so I don't have to keep on sorting it out once a month. So that might be something that if I could do for the rest of this year, and then next year I might do it one for 6 months, and then halfway through I'll do another one for 6 months, and hopefully that will work. But it's not something, I don't know how people do bullet journals, because I can't sit once every month and just fill out like a whole batch of things. It doesn't work for me. Making sure my goals are achievable, that's fine. And I've already discussed making it a date and taking my book everywhere. So these tips were really helpful, really enjoyed them. It's only keeping myself accountable, which I might have a little bit of a problem with in the future. So the next 6 tips that Diana gave were: replace your bad habits with reading, use the library, read what you like, switch it up, create a cozy reading environment, and read audiobooks, which I chose not to follow. Replacing my bad habits with reading actually worked really well, and do you know what? Every time I did find that I was spending too much time on YouTube, or I was spending too much time watching Netflix, or spending too much time doing nothing, I did find myself being like, oh, now's a good chance to read. And that usually would happen in an afternoon when I would just be doing nothing and I wouldn't know what to do, and I'd be feeling a bit bored. So then my mind would be like, oh, read. And I did, and therefore I definitely did read a lot more because of that. So that tip, actually, having that in the back of my head, I think for the entire month, really boosted my reading. Using the library, I am very pro-library. I love my library, but I am having a bit of trouble with my county's library system, and I'm not the biggest fan of them at the moment. Using the library for books for free great. However, I still have to pay because my library doesn't stock the sort of books that I read. Also, the time limit kind of works well, but not too well for me, because I still feel like it's too much time, and I know that there's always that button where you can press it and get it for longer. So that's more my self-control, not the library's control. However, I will say that it will definitely help in the future by keeping down my expenditure on books. Number 9, read what you like. I kind of already do this and did it, so that's fine. I liked that. Number 10, switching it up, actually works so well. You can see it stuck with me a lot. I read some massive books and I read some really thin books. Switching it up really helped. Every time I read a big book of a particular genre, I would then choose a smaller book with a very different genre, and that kind of kept me up to pace with my reading. It didn't make me feel like I was getting bored or fatigued. And so that one actually was really good. But then number 11, creating a cozy reading environment, I didn't do. To be honest, I think at the end of the day, I'm not one of these people who needs something to be really cozy to be able to like sit down and relax. I'm not a massively tidy person. If there's mess, chances are I probably don't even see it. I can just read wherever I want. So that's not something particularly useful to me personally, but I think it can be very useful to lots of other people. And then of course, if you do read audiobooks, I'm sure that's a great tip. So overall, Diana's tips actually worked really well for me. Of these 6, the ones that I'm going to keep up, I think, is definitely replacing my bad habits. I definitely will bear in mind every time I'm doing something I'm feeling a bit bored that I could be reading instead. That's always going to be there now, I hope. So that's one good thing. Switching it up is definitely something I'm going to bear in mind. Every time I finish a book, I'm going to try to read a book that is very different in style or length. I'm reading what I like. Yeah, that's a dream, isn't it? That's what we should all be striving for. So yeah, I actually ended up having a really great reading month, and I'm really pleased with what I have achieved. I have some new favourite books, and I have some books with authors I don't have any intention to continue on with. I still got to finish my Brent Weeks series, even though his book was quite average. I'm hoping it gets better. And I have a new favourite literary journal, which I hope I can continue reading, even though it is a bit pricey. So yes, that was my reading month. Did I read more? Yes, I think so. Will it help me to read more in the future? Yes, I think so. What do I say to Diana? Thank you. Thanks a lot for giving these tips. And I hope somebody else, anybody watching, I hope you give these tips a go. You try something similar, see how it affects your reading and reflect back on it and see what you can do in the future to help you reading more, if you want to read more. I'm sure a lot of you are actually pretty quite content with how much you do read. So if you do try any of these tips, let me know, let Diana know, and good luck with them. Here's to a good reading month in June. Hopefully my reading pace keeps up and I do get through as many, if not more, books next month or this month. So thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did like it, you are always free to give me a thumbs up, and as always, you can subscribe if you are interested in catching more videos from me. So I'll see you next time for another video. Bye bye.